Warrior season. Bad.
Big money! Big prizes! I love it!
Hello and welcome to another future classic episode of Retrovaniacs, the only podcast about old games that you can find called Retrovaniacs. I am one of your hosts, Jeremy Parmentier, and as always, I'm joined by Jeremy Gregory.
Hey there.
And Billy Holiday.
Hello.
This week we delved into the Game Boy for the first time, but before we get into that, what have you been playing since last time other than this game, Billy?
I hadn't really had time to play much over the last week or so, but this past Tuesday I had picked up that Metal Gear Solid 5, which I have been anticipating for quite a while, and I started a new shift in my job, so I only have maybe 2 or 3 hours every night, which I should be doing productive things with, but I have instead been dedicating it to that. And so far, at about 10 hours in, it has been highly enjoyable.
A lot of people I know online have been playing it and talking about it nonstop, but they were also huge fans of Metal Gear Solid 4, the whole series. I haven't actually played a Metal Gear Solid since the original Metal Gear Solid. I liked it. It's not that I don't like them. I just I haven't gotten around to them.
Yeah, and I think especially with that, having played all of them, I still, my son actually, who is starting to gain an interest in the series, he asked me yesterday, can you explain the storyline of Metal Gear? And I've played all the games. I said no. I said,
Yeah.
find you a nice Wikipedia article. Because having played them, I still can't fully explain it. So it's certainly... something is lost if you skip ahead. So if you wanted to jump straight into this one, you can enjoy the action from it or the gameplay from it, but good luck understanding a single thing. It's certainly a series you have to start at the beginning.
Well, I love the NES Metal Gear and even the US only sequel. I like both of those. And again, the first Metal Gear Solid I really liked. But yeah, I looked at this game and I thought, oh, this looks amazing. So I read a little bit just to kind of see the background. And I thought, like 4 words in, I'm like, have I ever played any of these games? This doesn't make any sense. So I can see that. All I've been playing is, because I don't play anything new apparently, is Hotline Miami. Finally played Hotline Miami. It's an excellent game. Everyone already knows that, so I'm telling everyone something that you already all know. But it's a great game. It's very basic, but at the same time, it's a perfect kind of Twitch, play for a little bit, put it down, play for a little bit, put it down, which is all I really have time for, so that's perfect.
I'm really interested to see what you think of, once you get through this, if you play Hotline Miami 2. I would love to see what you think of that game compared to the original.
Is it drastically different? I just finished the full basic game. I didn't get the password thing figured out yet, or because I don't have all the letters, but I'm going back now and finding all that stuff, so I'll have it. But is it a drastically different game? It looks very similar.
It's different. I mean, both me and Billy, I believe, beat it. It's much more wide open sometimes, and you actually switch between characters. So each one will have different types of, some people will only have a chainsaw. You can't actually pick up guns. They all kind of got their special kind of thing that they do. And I know a lot of people didn't like it as much as the original, but I don't know. I would like to see, really kind of what you think about it.
Yeah, and I'm glad they didn't go exactly 100% for just more of the same. But I can't say there's some things I like about it. There's some things I like more about it than the original. But there's also some directions. I think especially you'll find pretty early on that they put a lot of emphasis on gunplay in this one rather than just the melee that is pretty prevalent in the first. And that was a change that I didn't really care a lot for. Maybe other people will. It's decent. I still much prefer the first. But I, too, am also interested to see what you think about it.
Well, I'm sure we'll find out when it's on the PlayStation Network sale for $4 at some point soon. I guarantee I'll pick it up, and I'll let you know. So listen back to every episode till you eventually get my review of Hotline Miami 2. Jeremy, I imagine you're still playing The Witcher.
Oh, something terrible happened to me. So I was, a few weeks ago, kind of looking around for something to play. I had beat Batman, and I didn't want to play it anymore. And I wanted to wait and have something to play until Metal Gear Solid came out. And I decided to get back into The Witcher, which I had only played about 40, 50 hours of, and kind of got past the first big main story quest and I never felt like I got into it really, which is weird to say when you play something for 50 hours and you're just like, I don't know. But I picked it back up, and about 2 or 3 hours into it, something really clicked with me with that game, and it has consumed my life since then, to the point where I am now I'd say about 320 hours into that game, and I can't stop playing it. I haven't even started Metal Gear Solid 5 yet because I'm so into The Witcher. I am balls deep into Geralt of Rivia. It is one of those things that I very rarely ever get so completely consumed into, and I love it. I can't say enough about that game, but that is the game that I have primarily been playing.
You know, everybody that cares about Jeremy is in this podcast right now.
Yeah.
We could very well just turn the next 45 minutes possibly into an intervention.
I need an intervention. This is insane. What am I doing? I'm playing this game, and I can't stop playing. I need to stop playing it. I need to play Metal Gear. I know that's the game that I need to be playing, but this game has got me. I played cards with an innkeep last night for 2 hours straight because I couldn't be. It's a card game in the game, and I'm pretty good at it. But and when you beat these guys, they give you a card.
Yeah,
how can I not play this game? Somebody's got to do something. I mean, this is a cry for help. I think I need to stop playing The Witcher, and I don't know if I can dedicate 3 or 4 more weeks of my life to beating this game. Because I'm pretty sure I just now got to about the halfway point at 320 hours into the game. And there's so many more card games that I need to... There's so many more innkeeps that I need to beat. I need help. I need help.
I can sympathize in many ways, not just for, like in Final Fantasy IX, I'm doing that now. I'm just wandering through the town playing people for cards. And it's a kind of dumb game, but I still like it. But Red Dead Redemption, when they put in the poker games... I must have spent weeks just playing fake online poker with not even other people, with random computer people for hours. And then it serves no purpose. It was a totally pointless waste of time, but I loved every second of it.
Yeah, and usually I hate card games. And I did play my share of poker in Red Dead Redemption, but Gwent is the card game in Witcher 3, and it's actually a really well thought out card game. And at first, I didn't get it at all, like most card games, which is why I never got into Pokemon. But at some point, I just kind of played it so much that it's sort of, I don't know, I just got it. And I really got into it, and I was really obsessed about getting a good deck of good cards. And I was going down this hole that no one should ever go down. And now I found myself here, which is just... I'm praying that I can beat The Witcher and be done with this game so I can move on with my life.
Wow.
That sounds really terrible. But at the same time, I really now want to play The Witcher to learn about this card game.
This is one of the best role-playing games I've ever played. And there's a lot to kind of get through. There's a lot to wrap your head around. But at some point, if you play it enough, you'll get it, and it is one of the best role-playing games, as far as experiences go, that I've ever had.
Well, at least you got to take a break over the last 2 weeks to play this week's game, which is nothing like that at all. Gargoyle's Quest for the original Game Boy. Gargoyle's Quest is one of the games. I only had like 4 original Game Boy games for the longest time. I mean, I got a Game Boy very early, and I clearly had Tetris. I had Super Mario Land, and I had a Castlevania game that had amazing music but was totally unbeatable. And then at some point, I ended up with Gargoyle's Quest. and I got it one of two ways. The art on the box is absolutely terrible. It is a green, smiling gargoyle, like cartoon, and I would never have purchased the game based on that, except I only really bought games, and I may have brought this up before, I only really bought games at the military exchange, so they only had like 3 titles at a time. So if it came down to a game with a smiling green gargoyle, or like some kind of horse racing simulator, or a game I already had, then I was going to go home with a game with a smiling green gargoyle. But the other piece is that it was Capcom, and at that point in time, the NES era and into the Game Boy, if it said Capcom, there's a 99% chance that's a solid game. And so I'm going to go with that, although I guarantee it was just bought because it was the only thing that wasn't something I either already owned or was clearly not a game for me.
See, I didn't actually... I remember seeing this game in the store, and I remember seeing the box, and that box instantly turned me away because this was behind a glass case, so I didn't actually get to turn the box around and look at the game, because if I did, I would have probably been all right with it. But that box art, and anybody that's listening needs to go look at it, because
it'll be on our Twitter feed,
okay,
guaranteed.
All right. It is absolutely terrible. It looks like something from like a PBS Kids show or something, like Greg the Gargoyle's Fun with Numbers Hour or something. It doesn't look anything like what the game actually is. And I kind of feel cheated about that, because playing it now, this is a really, really good... I would have loved this game back then. But yeah, that box art's... Oh.
Yeah, and I'm going to chime in with pretty much the same opinion. I couldn't remember this game. The name was not familiar at all. But when I saw that box art, my local video store growing up had Game Boy games for rent. And I loved the Game Boy. Out of all the consoles I had, I probably spent the most time on it. And I immediately recognized this game as probably one of the 1 or 2 games at the video store that I passed over every single time. Yeah, box art wise, there's nothing, no inspiration behind it. It's as shitty as they come. But like Jeremy said, I really missed out by, judging the game just based on this box. Because really not a bad game.
Yeah, it's not a bad game at all. It's kind of a weird game, I guess, to exist at all. I mean, it's essentially you're playing not even a boss character, but kind of a lesser standard enemy from the Ghosts and Goblins series, the Red Gargoyle, or the Red Demon, Red Devil, whatever you want to call him. He's a horrible person to fight in Ghosts and Goblins, especially the Nintendo edition of Ghosts and Goblins. It's a guarantee if you saw the Red Devil, you were going to die horribly, unless you cheated it. At least for me, where you barely tap him on the screen and then he doesn't move and you can shoot him a bunch. That's the only way I've ever beaten him in Ghosts and Goblins. But his name is Firebrand in this game, and instead of being a Ghosts and Goblins side-scroller, and I'm sure everyone listening has at least played a version of Ghosts and Goblins, and if not, then you don't understand frustration. But this is not that kind of game necessarily. It's kind of a weird mix of a top-down role-playing game in parts, but also a 2D side-scroller, almost Castlevania style. With a scrolling screen, it's not just one long path like Mario is. You can go up and down and left and right. It's pretty big levels, but not open like Metroid where you can go around forever. They're pretty self-contained levels, but they're fairly open. So I'd say it's more like an early Castlevania in that aspect.
I'm possibly going to go ahead and get this out of the way early.
You want to do it now, huh?
Maybe this may be the day a friendship ends. And it's a shame, too, because it was just starting to form into something special. This is very reminiscent of that second Zelda title, The Adventures of Link. I think, you have your side-scrolling stages. Then you go into the overworld map, that top-down view with the random encounters that take place over a single screen. The town with the townspeople that are about equally as useless as the ones in Zelda. Yeah, a lot of this clearly reminded me of that, and I'll go ahead and say, maybe to cool things down, I mean that in the best possible way, because I was a big fan of that second Zelda.
Yeah, you brought that up to me before, and I almost just said we're not doing this podcast anymore. And then then I thought about it, and I grudgingly have to agree that on paper, this has very many of the same characteristics of Zelda 2. But I think, in a way, being on the Game Boy helped it a lot. So, much like the original Zelda, the meat and potatoes of the action is a 2D side-scrolling action game where you level up and you get increasing powers as you go on by beating bosses. So in that way, it's like any other game, a Metroid or a Legend of Zelda. It also has an overworld map that's top down, much like Zelda 2 did, which no other Zelda had that little extra map like that. I mean, Zelda 1 was overhead, but it was still action the whole time. But what made Zelda 2 terrible, and why this has probably the negative on this game, is when you're in the overworld sections, which you're just using it to wander from one town to the next action level or a town to another town, there are random encounters. And the random encounters are little side-scrolling sections that are just combat. And Zelda 2 had that as well. And I hated that in Zelda 2. In this game, it didn't bother me quite as much, but I can see the comparison to Zelda 2. I just don't want to accept it.
Well, there ain't no shame in it. Come on, you'll feel a lot better. But, yeah, the one thing, the random encounters probably are actually my biggest complaint about the game, especially when you just want to get from one point to the other. That's all you want. There's enough action in these main stages. You don't need it interspersed, and there's no real big challenge, and there's not really any big gains from these random encounters. And I think probably the thing that bothered me the most about it, and I maybe wouldn't have disliked it as much if they changed it up a little bit more with the environment and the enemies. I throughout the game had maybe the same 2 or 3 encounters in terms of the layout of the stage and the enemies. Very repetitive, and I think maybe if they changed it up a little bit, it wouldn't have seemed like such a chore. But that's certainly what it felt like, was a chore to get through.
And I can see the I totally see the comparison to Zelda 2, but even compared to Zelda 2, this is Zelda 2 done right. Because Zelda 2 was not a good game. I don't know what it is about it, but it's so condensed into just, I don't know, there's not that frustration level that Zelda 2 had. And as far as the random battles, I don't like them, but they're only usually maybe 1 or 2 screens long. There's maybe 2 or 3 enemies in any of them. You can beat these in less than 5 to 10 seconds. They're not really much of anything. The only problem I really had with them was just how much they came up. Like any JRPG from back in the day, they just pop up, it seemed like, every few seconds. But it never took me too long to beat them at all. So I never liked them, but they were, it wasn't something that bugged me as much as the ones, especially in Zelda 2.
Well, I guess the biggest thing I noticed with it compared to when I was thinking about the comparison to Zelda 2, yes, the fights were way easier. As a negative for Gargoyle's quest, they don't serve any purpose whatsoever. At least in Zelda, you were using it to level up and grind. Was it annoying? Certainly. Was it fun? No. But it served a purpose, where in this game it just seems to be padding out the game. It's not hard. You shouldn't die in them unless you're being extremely careless. You get your life to heal back to full every time you go to a new one, so it's not like you're going to slowly get whittled down as you go from place to place. They just seem like they were added in because someone thought this will be fun, and then no one took it out.
Yeah, it just kind of seems like they were thrown in because that was the status quo. I don't know, was this released before Zelda? I'm pretty sure it was released after.
It was after.
After, right. But, it just seems like it was somebody's attempt to outdo Zelda 2. And I don't think they needed to try because the gameplay mechanics on their own with Firebrand and how he controls in those side-scrolling levels, you could have just left out all of that role-playing game stuff that's in here, like the random battles and going around towns. Just put in, the side-scrolling stages themselves, which we'll get into, and that would have been fine because it's really, really fun to control him and use his powers and stuff to get around. Unlike Link, who really had nothing and was super awkward to control back then. So I don't know. I think they did a good job with what they were trying to do. But as far as what I would have wanted, I think I just wanted a better, more of what the game did best, which was controlling Firebrand on those side-scrolling stages.
And I agree. I agree with that. And I think one thing, I don't know if it was the top down, the traversing the map and going to the towns to talk. I don't know if that was boring or if it was just the side scrolling portions were done so well that as soon as I left one, I was ready to get to another one. I was wanting to get from one to the next, and all the stuff in between just kind of seemed like a barrier keeping me from that. I thought, like Jeremy said, if this would have been released as a more fleshed out, just side scrolling game, I would have enjoyed. I still liked it, but I would have enjoyed it even more then. I don't think it really needed all of those aspects. The traveling town to town, talking, and a lot of it's just throwaway conversation, as with most games of that type.
Well, and unlike Zelda 2, which I hate to keep comparing to Zelda 2, but since you already started it, it makes sense. But in Zelda 2, you felt like the overworld sections and the story kind of led you where to go next, at least, or gave you hints on what to do in certain dungeons. Here, it really is just padding. The story itself is completely unimportant. It doesn't matter. I mean, you're Firebrand. You're going to the Ghoul Realm to save it from an evil force, and you do that by going from town to town and talking to essentially demon mayors who say things like, "I need a staff. Go get it for me." And then you do a cool side-scrolling action section and get a staff and bring it back to him. And he goes, "Thank you," and you get like an extra level to your attack or a longer time in your flight controls. It just seemed like it was unnecessary padding for what could have been a really good, just nonstop 2D action game from start to finish.
And you know what really, actually, it kind of reminds me of with that unnecessary padding, and I know a lot of people would probably disagree with me, is ActRaiser. That game was a really, really great side-scrolling action game, but those city sections, those city building sections, to me, were always just padding, and I hated those as a kid. And I really just wanted to get to the meat of the things with the side-scrolling stages, and I was totally having flashbacks with that with this game. I really just wanted to get to those side-scrolling stages, but I was stuck roaming around this overhead map, constantly getting into these random battles. And, talking to people that I didn't care about, just so I could finally get back into these awesome side-scrolling stages, which is, what I wanted.
So the side-scrolling sections, we've all agreed, is basically what is the best part of this game is. So to differentiate it from every other 2D side-scrolling platformer / action game, the big thing this has is that your character can fly for a very short period of time. Again, this is a Game Boy game, so there's only 2 action buttons. One shoots your projectile, which you get different ones as you earn as you go up. And the other button jumps, or if you're already in the air, you push it and your character will hover. This, at first, it seems very basic as we explain it, but I guarantee for the first few minutes I was playing this, even though I had played this before and beat it before, I forgot exactly how important timing those jumps and flight sections really is in these platforming sections. Like, there are parts where... especially when you get new levels of wings that unlocks a next area for you and you're supposed to jump over a bridge. If you don't time that jump 100% to your newest wing extension for flight length, you're going to get to the end of where you're going and just miss landing by pixels. And it's great, but it's super frustrating.
It's frustrating, but it's not that type of frustrating that really puts you off from the game. It's that type of frustrating that makes you want to try it again and try something a little different, with your timing and whatnot. But yeah, there are some very delicate moves you have to make on this game. The jumps, like you're talking about, and there are some times where you're surrounded by spikes and you're having to drop and midway through the drop, initiate your float or flight or whatnot to get through another very narrow section of spikes, and at the same time make it onto a platform before it runs out. And this is it's a very daunting task, especially early on. Your character, flight-wise, you have maybe a good 2 or 3 seconds of it. And it takes a little bit to get used to that. And even later on in the game, when you get a lot of power-ups, I think one of your projectiles, you can kind of negate the spikes by it like shoots a goo on it, and now you can use that as a platform. Even with all that, there's still a great deal of challenge, but not that kind of really frustrating challenge that makes you regret the fact that you even played it to begin with.
Yeah, and I think one thing that the bosses do a really good job of, not only being bosses themselves that you kind of just got to, tear into, but most of them have very few platforms that you can actually jump onto. You have to use your flying ability to kind of get around them, and you also have the ability to kind of stick onto walls. So you can stick onto walls like a Ninja Gaiden, and then jump off and then do your kind of flying move to get to a higher, platform. And most of the bosses have those platforms just all over the place. So not only are you avoiding the boss and trying to, kill him and stuff like that, but you're also having to do some pretty crazy platforming with some of them to end up, it's pretty. I thought the game did a really expert job of really integrating that kind of.
I can see what you're saying. It does a very good job of putting the platforms exactly where you need them. It makes sense because they know exactly what your flight length is going to be at for each boss. So yes, a lot of the bosses almost feel like you have to dance around in a pattern almost while shooting the boss when you have a chance. But it's also more like a shooter in that you're having to really dodge a lot along with fighting.
Yeah, and I really appreciated that. It was not only with some of those power ups that you had to be pixel perfect on. Some of those bosses, like the skeleton boss, kind of in the middle, I remember, you had to be pixel perfect on those jumps that you had to get to, so you could actually hit him. I thought it was really clever. It was nice.
So yeah, the side-scrolling sections, pretty much from the start to the finish, are excellent. They're varied in style, visual style and difficulty. I mean, towards the end, it's literally just you find little places to stop for a second, and then you fly around as much as you can. Because the last level of power-up you earn for flight is unlimited flight, but flight is just a horizontal plane. You can't go up and down when you're flying. You have to stop flying and fall, and then you can start flying again in the middle of your fall, but you can't go up at any point. Nothing will force your character to go higher other than landing on a platform and jumping up. So a lot of the last couple levels are a lot of very delicate jumps through different levels of spikes where you have to land on either the goo that Billy had mentioned earlier. You can shoot out onto the spikes as a platform, or sometimes it's even platforms that fall and don't come back, which is super annoying. But at the same time, the levels are short enough that it's doable, but without making you want to break the game in half. But it still had a lot of challenge to it. I mean, you could play through this game in, an hour and 15 minutes tops maybe, but it still took me probably about 8 hours to get through it with repeated deaths on things that I probably shouldn't have died to.
I was pretty surprised with the challenge. Sorry. I was actually, I've been playing a lot of these Game Boy games for some of the reviews on the site and video reviews, and they have been nothing but easy. And going back to those now, it's kind of weird to see just how easy those were. So I was just kind of expecting this to kind of be a cakewalk like those were. But going into this, it definitely was a challenge straight from the start.
Yeah, very challenging. And I'd have to at least mention the music in this game. Also, I thought excellent. And the Game Boy is not known for it. The Game Boy is not known for producing many melodious sounds. I think Link's Awakening maybe being the only exception. This game also tremendous soundtrack to it. Yeah,
there'll be tons of clips from the game on the show, but yes, the music's excellent. The Game Boy, there aren't very many games that really showed off the musical strength of the Game Boy. This is a good one. That actually, the original Castlevania on Game Boy is very good. The music is far better than the game itself. There are a handful of games that really took advantage of what the Game Boy could do and made it sound amazing, and this is one of those games. The music is excellent. So this game itself has some flaws. You know, we've discussed that it has the random encounters, and that generally everything except for the 2D side-scrolling sections is extraneous garbage. The story is kind of unintelligible. I mean, you could follow what was going on, but it was really unless you wrote down everybody's name, because all the guys were named kind of similar. You know, it really was just you go to a town and a guy says, "Oh no, this evil force did this thing," and you go fight somebody, and you come back and the guy's like, "Thanks, go to this town." I mean, it was really just this unimportant junk till you get to the end where you're like, "Sure, of course you're the evil demon. I'll kill you. That sounds fun."
Yeah, and I don't know how much of that was just, nobody caring about translating this game at all from the original Japanese release or what, but totally has that, old NES Game Boy translation of just like, whatever, we don't, there's nothing really here to support any sort of story. You're a demon, you're flying through stuff and you need to kill stuff. That's all you really need.
It only really got bad in one part where I thought there's no way this is what they intended, which is there's a certain point where you get to a town, and then in order to I forgot what it is you're supposed to unlock, but you're supposed to find the second set of wings, I think. And the guy basically says, "It's by a tree behind the building." And you're like, oh. So you have to go outside, and basically I just go anywhere there's a tree, and eventually you search by the tree, which is the only time you use the search function you can do in the overworld. and you find the wings. It's like, there were the wings. Like, what a pointless junk piece of game. But again, all that extra, all the overhead stuff, the story, the towns, everything else except for the 2D side-scrolling really just feels like someone really wanted to make a role-playing game, and when it got to the part where they were making the combat, everyone's like, never do this again. We're just going to make an action game. And they used the pieces they made. I can't figure out why else you would do it this way, unless you only played Zelda 2 and then wanted to make a game. That's the only other excuse.
I mean, there is that Rambo game for NES as well. So
that may be next week's game.
That's the only other one that I can think of. But yeah, this really does come down to just kind of being like, man, I really liked Zelda 2, and here's the things that I want to do to kind of make it better. But I don't know. It's just one of those things that I would love to just have more of those side-scrolling stages, and everything else just seems like it was just tacked on for the sake of making a weird clone of Zelda 2.
Yeah, and that's definitely what they tried to do this time. But I was going to ask, I know there's at least a sequel to this. I'm not familiar with it at all. I imagine Jeremy P. has played it. Have they fixed anything from the first one in that?
So the second game is just called Gargoyle's Quest 2, and it was released on the NES after this, which means it's a very late NES game. If it came on after the Game Boy, it's probably Super Nintendo had been out for a while, which is why nobody played Gargoyle's Quest 2. And it plays like a late era NES game. It has some pretty impressive graphic ability for the NES. The sound is very good. Essentially, it's almost the same kind of game as this. I mean, the levels are all different, but it plays almost the same. But you can tell that they realize that the random encounters are pointless because they're totally gone. Nice. The overworld is nothing but a way to get from place to place. They added a few puzzles into that overworld section to kind of figure out, like there's a series of mazes that are in caves, kind of where like all the caves look very similar, but only one will take you to the other end. There's one of those in this game, too, but it doesn't explain that. At least in Gargoyle's Quest 2, it kind of explains it. But basically, if you liked Gargoyle's Quest 2 is more of the same. I think the 2D side-scrolling levels are a little bit better. They're larger, definitely, and they're harder. They do have some more cheapness to them. There's a good number of things that in those levels that just spawn out of the air. Like after you kill one, another one spawns, and they kind of follow you around in a few levels. That's extremely cheap. But other than that, the rest of the game plays very well. Much like this did. I actually downloaded this for the 3DS Virtual Console after I played this, and I loved it. I think if you like Gargoyle's Quest at all, there's no reason not to at least try Gargoyle's Quest 2, especially for $5 if you're going to go about it the correct way. But the free way was probably good too.
Is there a card game in the second one?
There was no card game. It's just more of this without a lot of the things we didn't like about this one.
It's a deal breaker. It's a deal breaker. I'm not doing it. I need
a card game.
Cards from people that I talk to. This is what I need.
Well,
in my life.
There was a third sequel for the Super Nintendo, just called Demon's Crest. The action sequences are again very similar to this. You're Firebrand, you have flight, but Demon's Crest takes place after both of these games. So you start the game with unlimited flight. You get a lot of other powers in that game. You'll earn the ability to turn into different kind of gargoyles, some of which have different powers than you normally have. It's a much more fleshed out game. It has almost none of the extraneous garbage that this has. There is an overworld map, but it's literally just used like a map, essentially. You fly over the map, nothing ever attacks you, and you go to different places that you can see on the ground. I mean, it's almost like an airship in Final Fantasy more than an overworld map. So I highly recommend Demon's Crest for the NES, even if you haven't played these two. It's definitely the most refined version of what they were attempting to do here. But it's also extremely hard compared to these two games. I haven't beaten it. I've only gotten through a couple bosses, and it's very unforgiving.
And Demon's Crest is the one that I first played. So actually learning that there was, sort of prequels to that game was pretty cool. But Demon's Crest is definitely what I wanted. It's just nothing but those side-scrolling levels. It's so much fun. It is extremely hard though. So if you're not into the challenge or whatever like that, but it gets rid of all of the the random battles and the kind of RPG stuff, and just takes it down to the pure kind of 2D side-scrolling platforming game that it should have been in the first place. And it's so much fun. It looks amazing. It's one of the best-looking Super Nintendo games that's out there, especially the boss battles. It's if you never played it, it is one to definitely check out.
But even if you, for some reason, wanted to start with the beginning, I still don't think you'd go wrong trying Gargoyle's Quest for Game Boy. It's available on the 3DS Virtual Console for, I think, $4 or whatever. And unlike a lot of games where the later versions really, you're like, man, they really refine this to a point where it's amazing. If you can get past the random battles, this is still, the 2D sections are still, some of the best 2D side-scrolling I've played on the Game Boy, hands down. And actually for pretty much any of the early 8-bit systems, even 16-bit systems, it's a very solid set of levels.
Yeah, I mean,
definitely. It's the level of depth that those side-scrolling levels have, especially on the Game Boy. I would recommend this game to anybody. It's really, really good, and I really feel bad about missing out on this back when I was a kid.
Yeah, and I'm going to go 3 for 3 on this one. It's well worth your time. It's not a lot of time. It's a quick game. If you're very proficient with it, you could play through in one sitting, easy enough. Especially, I also wish I would have played this long ago, but I am glad it was brought up and I've had the chance to play through, and I'll probably play through the sequels also. But yeah, definitely worth your time. Definitely, I think for all the bad parts in it, the good being those side-scrolling levels way overshadow it.
It's nice to have a game we unanimously agree we like. It's been a few episodes since we've had that. The last ones have not been quite as enjoyable, so that's good.
I don't think we've all agreed on a game, how good a game is since General Chaos, probably.
Let me tell you about a game called General Chaos.
Let's just remember we all like pro wrestling and go from there.
Pro wrestling is pretty good.
So much like every week, we asked for some questions, and thankfully, this week, we did get a question. We also got our first recommendation, or at least that I had, first formal recommendation for a game. It will not be next week's game, and I'm not sure if we're really going to do it, but someone really wants us to play Sewer Shark on the Sega CD. So I will add it to the list. I figure we've already got enough games on the list. At some point, I can surprise everyone with that. Or maybe we'll put it on the site as a video or a live stream or something. But the question he asked I actually really liked. I'm going to reword it because the way he worded it was absolutely terrible. But what is your, White Whale, the game you've played over and over and over again? It's a game you love and you want to beat, but you just haven't beaten it. It's just either too hard or there's something about it that you can't finish it. But not a game that's so bad you want to finish it and never play it again. This is a game that you've tried to play for years over and over again and just have never finished. Mine, I'll go first. Mine is, I was going to say Zelda 2, but I actually did finally beat Zelda 2 a year ago just to prove that I could, and I did not enjoy it. But it's one that I'd played over and over again because I always forget how much I hate the game till I get about 4 dungeons in, and then I hate it. But I did beat it just to say I could, and I'm never going to play it again. The one I still have, the NES cart, I pull it out every couple months and try to get through it, and I never do, is the original Blaster Master. I love the game, I love everything about it, and I'll just get to a certain point, and because of the lack of passwords, there's no save. It's a sit down in one play and finish it game, and it's a long game. I mean, I guess if you really knew everything, you could blow through it in 2 or 3 hours, but I always get about 4 hours in, and I realize I'm only 6 out of 8 dungeons through it, maybe, and I've never beaten it, but I want to. And someday, I'm going to have a weekend where no one's around, and I'm going to finish it. But that's the game. I don't know how many times I've played it. I'd get to the water section and die every single time.
I'll tell you, I have one. It's not a retro game by far. I don't know if the question didn't specify.
It didn't. Any game, it doesn't necessarily matter.
But my biggest one, and I would think harder about a retro title if this one did not stand out. This is a 360 title, a Lost Odyssey. It's RPG, and the moment I got it, I picked this up during a period of time where I was unemployed and generally had given up on life in general. So I had nothing but time to play video games, and that's what you needed for this thing. You got to imagine it's on the 360, and it's also a 4-disc, I believe it's 4-disc game.
Yes.
So it's a hefty game. And I had put in maybe 30, 40 hours into it. And I was moving along pretty well, and I generally am pretty slow moving on those games as far as progressing. And I really loved it. I loved the care. I thought the child characters in it were fairly annoying. I loved all the other characters. I loved the direction the story was going in. Great soundtrack. Very beautiful game. But I made my usual RPG mistake of saving my game in a very inopportune position. I was very low on all items. I think essentially I have no items at all. I still have this saved for whatever reason. Almost no items at all. Everyone is in fairly critical health. And as soon as I load up that save, I am forced into a battle, no matter which direction I walk in. So there's no getting through it. I have read online for tips. I've watched videos on YouTube. There's nothing for it. So I had realized, like I said, about 34 hours in, that I am stuck. I've hit a wall. And this was also about the time that I gained employment. And I just didn't have the time I had then. And every now and then I would try again with the same results. And it's been a few years now, and I want to try again every now and then, but the heartbreak is just too great every time.
Lost Odyssey is one that I have finished, but I had the same exact problem the first time. I would, I normally try to do 2 to 3 saves that I cycle through, and there will always be one that I save at this is right before this cutscene or whatever, so I'll save there. And then eventually I'll get far enough where I'm like, I'm never going to go back to that spot, so I can save over that. Because I know I'm going to run into that problem. But the first time I played Lost Odyssey, I only probably had 2 save spots, and I ended up saving both in a spot that was not good. I don't know what I was thinking, but it was very similar. I couldn't get through where I was stuck. I didn't want to spend... I could have just, somehow found a way to just grind, because it's by a save spot. I could have grinded for a long time, but it just wasn't enjoyable at that point to grind. So I had to start over again, and I did wait like 3 years to start over again. But then when I did, it took me almost no time to get back to where I was, and I finished it. I highly recommend it that you go back and finish it at some point. But I did have the same problem you did, because there are some sections in that, and I don't know how far you are, but there are several sections where you literally just walk for screens.
Yeah.
Upon screens, seeing the same exact thing. It fits into the story, and I get why they did it. But when you're actually playing it, especially on the second or third time through, it's painful. And there's no way to skip it. It's just, mindlessly walking in a direction to find something. And they make you do it in real time. It's really painful. But that said, the first time I did it, I thought it was really cool because it fit with the story and it was awesome. But yeah, I can see getting stuck in that and saying I'll come back to that several years down the road.
As for me, I guess I've got a kind of more modern game and a more retro game. My modern game is Wind Waker, and I hate the Wind Waker, but I love it. I really love the Wind Waker. I love its style. I love its story. I love everything about it. But I hate playing the Wind Waker, especially when you get the boat. Back on GameCube, it was so tedious. And I just could not get past... I don't even think I made it past half the game. And when it came out on the Wii U as like a remaster or whatever, I was like, I'm going to try this. I'm really, really going to try to sit down and beat this game. Especially since it had an item that you could get that increased the sailboat speed. I think it was by like 2 or 4. It made it way faster than what it was. So I was like, I'm going to do this. I got all the way, to the item. I got it, and I was still just like, I got further than I was on the GameCube, but I still just could not muster the time needed to beat this game. There's just something about it that makes me want to not play it. And I always get stuck in that mode with the Wind Waker where I get further than I did before, but then I just stop playing it and I don't think of it anymore. So that's where I've kind of stopped with the Wind Waker on Wii U. I don't know if I'm ever going to beat this game. There's just something about that, going around on your sailboat that I don't like. And I really, really just dislike going the way that game plays. It's so boring.
The sailing parts are super tedious. I don't know if you ever played the Spirit Tracks DS game. It's a Zelda Spirit Tracks. It's the same idea, except you're on a train between areas, and it's a train that you can't control other than if you speed up or slow down because you're on tracks. So imagine if you had to just kind of mindlessly ride on a train for hours. That was the gimmick to that game. I finished it, and I hated every second of it.
I just can't get by the sailing. It seems like there should be so much more in that world, but every grid on that map is basically just one tiny island, unless it's a dungeon, and what's on that island isn't anything worth exploring.
10 rupees.
Yeah, that's basically what you get. There's some races around the ocean or whatever that you're going around, but it's so boring, and I just can't deal with it. As for my retro game, I probably have to say Rygar for the NES. I've never been able to beat that game. It's not a hard game, really, but it's just one of those games I've sat down several times to beat, and I was never able to get through that.
The end of Rygar actually is pretty hard.
Is it?
Up to the end of the game, it's not too bad. And then when you get to the last couple areas, I have beaten it in the past. I don't know if I could sit down and beat it now, because it's got some real BS towards the end as far as difficulty goes. And the last boss is super cheap, as I recall. But yeah, that's one I can see. I loved Rygar. For some reason, it's in my mind, even though they're not even the same company. I put Rygar and Karnov in the same boat, where I love the concept of the game. I want to play the game. I get about 4 levels in, I no longer want to play the game, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly why that is. I mean, it's not that it gets too hard or that I get bored with it. I'm just like, yeah, I've had my fill of this. I feel good about it. I'm going to play something
I think that's
else.
about how I feel with Wind Waker as well. You get to that point in Wind Waker after like the 4th dungeon or so, and you're just like, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to sail this fucking little boat across the entire sea to go back, to do whatever I need to do. And that's the only Zelda game that I've ever had that problem with. But yeah, the Wind Waker it really kills me because I really, really want to beat that game.
And I'm a huge Zelda fan, and I love the Wind Waker, but I can see where Jeremy is coming from, because I've had more than one occasion where I'll save my game, and I did pick up the Wii U version when it came out, and I'll save my game, and I'll start it up again, the next day or a day or two later, and I'll notice, this is why I quit, because the next thing I have to do is sail this incredible distance. So I'll just cut it off again. I have skipped over and avoided that game just because I knew I was going to have to take a long haul. Because it's a very empty. I guess it's a very mediocre attempt at an open world, but it's a very empty world. There's not much out there. But if you do persevere long, if you do choose to play it again, there is a point where there's a spell or whatnot you can learn to teleport to and fro. You can't teleport everywhere exactly, but it spreads it out well enough to where you really don't have to do the long haul across the ocean anymore.
I think the craziest thing was just when I started playing that Wii U version. I hadn't played it since the GameCube version. Just I could not believe how slow it was to get around on that sailboat. Like, I know it was a limitation of the GameCube's memory. You know, they couldn't really make it go much faster. But man, it is torturous to get around that thing without the 2x or 4x speed boost that you can win in the auction house.
Yeah, I remember it being very. Again, I liked the idea of it, but then when I was actually playing it, I was kind of just unimpressed with the open sailing. Also, because there's all those random things that you run into to fight, but it's not even like they're very interesting to fight. It was just more to do. And Spirit Tracks, like I mentioned earlier, had the same problem where literally you'd be just driving away on a train, and all of a sudden you have to fight off these birds that attack you or guys that throw rocks at you, and you're like, this is awful. Just take me to the level. That's all I want to do. And as an added bonus in quotes, it was a DS Zelda, so everything's done via the touchpad and the stylus, as opposed to actually moving Zelda, Link around with the D-pad. So it was an unenjoyable game all around. At least Wind Waker didn't have that.
Yeah, I'm kind of glad I skipped that one. But yeah, those are definitely my two. Maybe someday I'll conquer those games.
You got to stop playing The Witcher first.
No. Let me tell you about The Witcher 3.
All right. Well, that's the end of the show today. We're gonna. But before we end the show, much like every other week, we'll tell you what's coming up next week. Next week's game, in honor of the start of the NFL season, we're going to play Mutant League Football for the Sega Genesis. That's one I did play before, although clearly not enough. But more importantly, Mutant League Football. Coming next time, please follow us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Retrovaniacs, and we'll see you next time.